I was 16, sitting on the stairs in complete darkness, when I heard Janet say the words that would change everything. We wish we didn't adopt her. The living room light cast shadows through the banister, but I stayed perfectly still. My foster dad Mark just grunted in agreement. She's nothing but trouble. Always has been. My heart stopped beating for what felt like forever. They had no idea I was there, listening to every cruel word. I pressed my back against the cold wall, fighting back tears. These people had taken me in when I was 8 years old. I thought they loved me. I thought I was their daughter. But sitting there in the dark, I realized I was just a burden they regretted taking on. That night, I made a promise to myself. They would regret saying those words. They would regret treating me like I was worthless. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I would make them pay for every moment they made me feel like nothing. The anger burning in my chest felt better than the pain. The next morning, I went to school like nothing happened. But everything had changed inside me. I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. Like how Janet always bragged to her friends about being such a loving foster mom on Facebook. How Mark told his coworkers what a blessing I was to their family. It was all fake. Complete lies. At lunch, I sat alone in the library and started writing. I wrote down every mean thing they'd ever said to me. Every time Janet screamed at me for leaving a dish in the sink. Every time Mark called me stupid for asking homework questions. Every time they made their biological son Danny feel like he was better than me. The list was 3 pages long, and I was just getting started. I titled it Evidence. Because that's what it was. Proof that Janet and Mark weren't the saints they pretended to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Come straight home after school. We need to talk. I smiled for the first time in months. Perfect. Let them try to lecture me again. When I got home, Janet was waiting in the kitchen with her arms crossed. She looked furious. Your teacher called, she said. Apparently you've been skipping classes. I hadn't been skipping. I'd been going to the guidance counselor's office during study hall. But I didn't correct her. Sorry, I said, keeping my voice flat. Mark walked in, still wearing his work uniform. We're disappointed in you, Maya, he said. We give you everything, and this is how you repay us? Everything? They gave me hand-me-down clothes and the basement bedroom that flooded every winter. They gave me chores while Danny got to play video games. They gave me criticism while Danny got praise. You're right, I said quietly. I'm sorry. They looked surprised. They expected me to argue like I usually did. But I had learned something important. Fighting back only made them angrier. Staying quiet made them feel powerful. And when people feel powerful, they get careless. They make mistakes. Janet nodded approvingly. Good. Now go do your chores. I went downstairs to my room and pulled out my notebook. Time to add today's conversation to my evidence list. That weekend, I volunteered to clean the whole house. Janet was shocked. Really? She asked. Without being asked. I nodded and smiled sweetly. I want to help the family more. What I really wanted was access to every room in the house. While I dusted and vacuumed, I looked through everything. Mark's desk drawers. Janet's purse. Danny's backpack. I found things that made my hands shake with excitement. Mark's credit card statements showed charges to bars and casinos that Janet didn't know about. Janet's phone had screenshots of text messages where she complained about me to her sister. Maya is such a difficult child. Sometimes I wonder why we ever adopted her. But the best discovery was in Danny's room. My 17-year-old brother had been selling his ADHD medication at school. Little plastic bags were hidden in his sock drawer, along with almost $300 in cash. I took pictures of everything with my phone. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it. They had no idea what was coming. I was building a case against them, piece by piece. And soon, everyone would see who they really were. Monday morning at school, I asked to speak with Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor. She was a kind woman in her 50s who actually listened when students talked. Maya, she said warmly, how are things at home? I had practiced this conversation in my head all weekend. They're okay, I said, then paused. Can I ask you something? If a student was having problems at home, what would happen if they reported it? Her expression became serious. It depends on what kind of problems. If there's abuse or neglect, we're required to contact Child Protective Services. I nodded slowly. What counts as neglect? She explained that neglect could include not providing proper food, clothing, medical care, or emotional support. Also, she added, if parents are using a child's Social Security benefits inappropriately, that's considered financial abuse. My heart started racing. I had seen mail addressed to me that Janet always grabbed first. Letters from the state about my monthly stipend. Money that was supposed to be for my care, but I never saw any of it. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, I think I need help. That afternoon, I showed Mrs. Patterson some of the photos on my phone. Her face went pale when she saw the text messages Janet had sent about me. Maya, this is emotional abuse, she said softly. How long has this been going on? I told her about the years of being treated differently than Danny. How they bought him name-brand clothes but gave me thrift store rejects. How they celebrated his achievements but ignored mine. How they made me do all the household chores while he got to focus on sports and friends. Mrs. Patterson took notes while I talked. I need to ask, she said gently, do they ever hit you or threaten you physically? I shook my head. Janet and Mark were too smart for that. They knew how to hurt me with words and neglect instead of bruises. We need to document everything, Mrs. Patterson said. Can you write down specific incidents with dates? I smiled. I already have. I pulled out my notebook and showed her the 3 pages of evidence I'd compiled. Her eyes widened as she read. Maya, this is very thorough. She had no idea how thorough I was planning to be. The next few weeks, I became the perfect foster daughter. I did my chores without complaining. I brought home good grades. I was polite and quiet at dinner. Janet and Mark were thrilled with my improved attitude. See? Janet told her friend on the phone. She just needed some structure and discipline. I was listening from the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, while Danny played video games in his room. Maya's finally starting to appreciate everything we've done for her, Mark added. They had no idea I was recording their conversations. The voice memo app on my phone was always running now. I had hours of audio where they talked about me like I wasn't a real person. Where they discussed my monthly stipend money like it belonged to them. Where they made jokes about difficult foster kids and how they deserved medals for putting up with me. Every recording went straight to a cloud storage account I'd created. Even if they took my phone, the evidence would be safe. Mrs. Patterson checked in with me every few days. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm building my case, I told her. She smiled proudly. Good girl. 3 weeks later, I made my first official report. Mrs. Patterson sat with me in her office while I called the Child Protective Services hotline. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I need to report neglect and financial abuse, I told the intake worker. I gave them Janet and Mark's names, our address, and a detailed summary of what had been happening. The worker asked if I felt safe at home. For now, I said. But I think they're stealing my support money. She scheduled a home visit for the following week. In the meantime, she said, document everything you can. I almost laughed. If only she knew how much I'd already documented. That night at dinner, Janet was in a great mood. She'd gotten compliments at work about what a transformation I'd made. People are asking how we turned you around, she said proudly. Mark nodded. We should write a book about fostering difficult children. Danny snorted. Maya was never that difficult. You guys just didn't like her. Janet's face turned red. Daniel, that's enough. But Danny kept talking. Come on, Mom. We all know you only keep her for the check. The room went silent. Janet's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mark set down his fork hard. Apologize to your mother, he told Danny. But I was smiling inside. Even Danny could see the truth. The CPS worker, Ms. Rodriguez, arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I was at school, but Janet had taken the day off work to prepare. She spent hours cleaning the house and cooking my favorite meal. When I got home, she was wearing her nicest dress and had put flowers on the kitchen table. Maya, honey, she said in a sickeningly sweet voice, we have a visitor. Someone from the county wants to make sure you're happy here. Ms. Rodriguez was a serious woman with kind eyes. She shook my hand and asked if we could talk privately. Janet's smile faltered. Of course, she said quickly. Maya has nothing to hide. Ms. Rodriguez interviewed me in my basement bedroom. She looked around at the water stains on the walls and the space heater I used because it was so cold down there. Is this where you sleep? She asked. I nodded. Always has been. Danny gets the nice room upstairs because he's their real son. She wrote that down. Then I showed her my evidence folder. The photos, the recordings, the financial documents I'd found. Her eyebrows went higher with each page. Maya, she said slowly, this is very impressive work. How long have you been collecting this? Since I figured out they didn't really want me, I said. I wanted proof. Ms. Rodriguez spent 2 hours at her house. She interviewed Janet and Mark separately, then asked to see financial records. Janet was sweating by the time she left. She wants bank statements, Janet told Mark that night. I was doing homework at the kitchen table, pretending not to listen. Why? Mark asked nervously. Something about Maya's support payments. They went into their bedroom and closed the door, but I could still hear them arguing. Mark's voice was getting louder. I told you we should have put that money in a separate account. Janet was crying. How was I supposed to know she'd cause problems? Problems. That's what I was to them. A problem that generated money they felt entitled to spend. The next morning, Danny cornered me before school. Did you really call CPS on Mom and Dad? He asked. I looked him straight in the eye. Yes. He seemed shocked that I admitted it. Why? He asked. Because they said they wished they never adopted me. I told him. And now they're going to get their wish. His face went pale. Maya, they didn't mean it. Yes, they did, I said. And so do I. A week later, Ms. Rodriguez called with news. Maya, we've reviewed your case file and the evidence you provided. We're moving forward with an investigation. My heart started pounding. What does that mean? It means we're going to look into the financial irregularities you reported, and we're going to evaluate whether your current placement is appropriate. That afternoon, Janet got a phone call that made her scream. I was in my room, but could hear her through the ceiling. What do you mean, fraud investigation? She shouted. We've done nothing wrong. Mark came home early from work looking gray and shaken. They called me upstairs for another family meeting. This time, their voices weren't angry. They were scared. Maya, Janet said carefully, there seems to have been some misunderstanding with the county. I sat quietly and waited. They think we've been mismanaging your support funds, Mark added. Which is ridiculous, of course. I nodded. Of course. Janet looked hopeful. So, if you could just tell them that we've always taken good care of you. But you haven't, I said simply. Their faces fell. You've taken my money and spent it on yourselves. You've made me live in a flooded basement. You've told people you wish you never adopted me. Mark's voice became sharp. You little. Careful, I warned. They're probably listening now. The investigation moved quickly after that. Financial auditors came to the house with boxes of documents. They wanted 7 years of bank records, receipts, and proof of how my support money had been spent. Janet cried through the entire process. The auditors found that almost $60,000 meant for my care had been diverted to Mark and Janet's personal expenses. Vacations, restaurant bills, Danny's sports equipment, Janet's shopping trips. Meanwhile, I had been wearing secondhand clothes and sleeping in a basement that wasn't even up to code. Ms. Rodriguez called me into her office with news. Maya, we're removing you from the home immediately. My stomach flipped with excitement and terror. Where will I go? We have a wonderful emergency placement family, she said. The Johnsons have been fostering teens for 10 years. They specifically requested to meet you after hearing about your case. That afternoon, I packed my few belongings while Janet watched from the doorway. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked angry. "You've destroyed this family," she said bitterly. I turned to face her. "No," I said quietly. "I exposed it." Mark appeared beside her. "You're going to regret this, Maya. No one else will want a troublemaker like you." I smiled. "We'll see." The Johnsons' house was everything Janet and Mark's wasn't. Warm, welcoming, and filled with pictures of all the kids they'd fostered over the years. Mrs. Johnson hugged me when I arrived. "We're so proud of you for speaking up," she said. Mr. Johnson helped me carry my bags to a beautiful bedroom on the second floor. It had its own bathroom and huge windows that let in tons of sunlight. "This is all mine?" I asked. Mrs. Johnson smiled. "All yours. We believe every child deserves privacy and dignity." That first night, they took me out for pizza and asked about my interests, my goals, my dreams. Nobody had ever asked me those questions before. When we got home, Mrs. Johnson sat me down for a serious conversation. "Maya, we know you've been through trauma. We want you to know that healing takes time, and we're here for as long as you need us." I started crying. Not sad tears, but relief tears. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what, honey?" she asked. "For seeing me as a person instead of a problem." That night, I slept better than I had in years. And for the first time, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. Back at Janet and Mark's house, things were falling apart. Danny called me a few days after I left. "Maya, they're going crazy," he said. "Mom hasn't stopped crying, and Dad's drinking more than usual." The fraud investigation had expanded. They weren't just looking at my support money anymore. They were examining all of Mark's business expenses and Janet's medical billing practices at work. "They might lose the house," Danny told me. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in that basement. "I'm sorry this is happening to your family," I said. "But they brought it on themselves." Danny was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said finally. "I knew they treated you different, and I never said anything." "I'm sorry, Maya." That meant more to me than he could know. A week later, Mrs. Patterson called with an update. "Maya, I thought you'd want to know. The state is filing criminal charges against Janet and Mark." My hands started shaking. "For what?" "Fraud, child neglect, and theft." I sat down hard on my bed. It was really happening. They were going to face consequences for what they'd done to me. The local newspaper picked up the story 2 weeks later. The headline read, "Foster parents charged with defrauding child support funds." I showed the article to Mrs. Johnson, who hugged me tight. "How do you feel about this?" she asked. "Scared," I admitted. "But also proud." I stood up for myself when no one else would. The article mentioned that I had been instrumental in gathering evidence for the case. It talked about how foster children are often vulnerable to financial abuse because they don't understand their rights. Reading it made me realize something important. I wasn't just getting justice for myself. I was shining a light on a problem that affected other kids too. Mrs. Johnson encouraged me to speak with a victim's advocate about the criminal case. "You have a voice in this process," she explained. "You can write an impact statement for the judge." That night, I started writing again. But this time, I wasn't documenting abuse. I was documenting survival. I was telling my story of fighting back against people who underestimated me. And I was preparing to face Janet and Mark in court. #16 The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a month later. Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Johnson both offered to come with me for support. Walking into that courthouse was terrifying and empowering at the same time. Janet and Mark sat with their lawyer at the defendant's table. They looked smaller somehow, older and more tired than I remembered. When the prosecutor read the charges against them, Janet started crying again. But Mark just stared straight ahead with a blank expression. The judge reviewed my evidence folder, which had grown to over 50 pages. He looked at the photos of my basement bedroom, listened to audio recordings of their conversations, and examined the financial documents showing where my support money had really gone. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen," he told the prosecutor. Then he looked directly at me. "Young lady, Your attention to detail and courage in coming forward likely prevented years of continued abuse. Janet's lawyer asked for the charges to be reduced, claiming his clients were overwhelmed parents who made mistakes. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, this wasn't a mistake. This was a systematic pattern of financial abuse and neglect spanning 8 years. The judge denied the request for reduced charges. Janet collapsed into sobs. Mark still showed no emotion. But I felt something I'd never experienced before: validation. While waiting for the trial, I focused on rebuilding my life with the Johnsons. They enrolled me in counseling to help process 8 years of emotional trauma. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. Children aren't responsible for adult behavior, she reminded me weekly. You didn't cause Janet and Mark to steal from you or treat you badly. I also started catching up academically. Janet and Mark had never prioritized my education, but the Johnsons hired a tutor to help me prepare for college. For the first time, I dared to dream about my future. Maybe I could become a lawyer and help other kids in foster care. Maybe I could be a social worker like Ms. Rodriguez. One day, Danny C.A. led again. Maya, I wanted you to know that I testified to the investigators, he said. I told them everything I saw over the years. I was surprised. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, he said. And because I'm proud of you. What you did took guts. That conversation meant everything to me. I realized I hadn't just lost Janet and Mark. I'd gained a real relationship with Danny based on honesty instead of their lies. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on the second day, telling the jury about 8 years of being treated like a burden instead of a daughter. I talked about sleeping in a flooded basement while Danny had a comfortable room upstairs, about wearing second-hand clothes while they bought him name-brand everything, about doing all the household chores while he focused on school and sports. But most importantly, I talked about the night I heard them say they wished they'd never adopted me. That's when I realized I needed to protect myself, I told the jury, because no one else was going to do it. The prosecutor presented my evidence folder as Exhibit A. Every photo, every recording, every document I'd collected became part of the official record. Janet's lawyer tried to argue that I was a troubled child who had misunderstood their intentions. But the evidence was too strong. The financial records showed clearly that my support money had been stolen. The recordings proved they talked about me, with contempt. The photos of my living conditions spoke for themselves. When the jury came back with guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt 8 years of anger and hurt finally transform into something else: peace. Janet was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay $63,000 in restitution. Mark got 18 months and was required to attend financial responsibility classes. They also lost their license to foster children, meaning no other kid would go through what I experienced. After the sentencing, I ran into Janet in the courthouse hallway. She looked at me with pure hatred. Are you happy now? She spat. You've destroyed our family. I looked at her calmly. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I just told the truth about what you did to me. She started to respond, but Mark pulled her away. Come on, he muttered. She's not worth it. As they walked away, I realized something profound. They were wrong 8 years ago when they said I was worthless. And they were wrong now. I was worth fighting for. I was worth protecting. I was worth justice. That night, the Johnsons took me out for a celebration dinner. How do you feel? Mrs. Johnson asked. Free, I said. And for the first time in my life, I really meant it. The people who said they wished they'd never adopted me were facing the consequences of their choices. And I was finally free to become whoever I wanted to be. 6 months later, I started my senior year of high school with a 3.8 GPA and college acceptance letters piling up. The Johnsons had officially adopted me, giving me the family I'd always dreamed of. I chose to keep my original last name but added theirs with a hyphen. Maya Chin Johnson felt like the perfect combination of honoring my past and embracing my future. I also started volunteering with a local organization that helped foster children understand their rights. Many kids had no idea they were entitled to support money or that their foster parents couldn't legally use it for personal expenses. I taught them how to document problems and advocate for themselves. One afternoon, I got a surprising phone call. Maya? This is Danny. I hadn't heard from him since the trial.
Dan.
How are you? I wanted to tell you something, he said. Mom and Dad got divorced while she was in prison, and I'm living with my grandparents now. I felt sorry for him. Despite everything, he was innocent in all this. I'm sorry your family fell apart, I said sincerely. Actually, he said, I wanted to thank you. Living with my grandparents has made me realize how messed up our house was.
You did the right thing, Maya.
I just wish I'd been brave enough to help you sooner. College was everything I'd hoped it would be. I majored in social work with a minor in criminal justice, determined to help other vulnerable children navigate the system. During my sophomore year, I started a blog called Foster Kid Chronicles, where I shared my story and provided resources for other young people in care. The blog went viral after a major parenting website featured it. Suddenly, I was getting messages from foster kids all over the country who felt inspired by my story. But I also heard from foster parents who were angry that I'd made them all look bad. Some of the comments were cruel, accusing me of being ungrateful and vindictive. Those hurt, but they also motivated me. If adults were this threatened by a foster child speaking truth, it proved how much advocacy was needed. My junior year, I was invited to speak at a national foster care conference. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of social workers, attorneys, and advocates, I felt the full weight of how far I'd come. 8 years ago, I was a child sleeping in a basement, being told I was worthless. I began. Today, I'm here because I refuse to accept that narrative. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories of overcoming childhood trauma. I graduated summa cum laude and was accepted into a master's program in child advocacy. The day I walked across that stage, the Johnsons were in the front row cheering loudly. But I also spotted a familiar face in the back of the auditorium. Danny had driven 3 hours to watch me graduate. We met for coffee afterward, and he told me about his life. He'd struggled with depression and guilt after the trial, but was now studying to become a teacher. I want to be the kind of adult who notices when kids are hurting, he said. Like you were hurting, and nobody saw it except you. We talked for hours about forgiveness, healing, and the complicated nature of family. I realized that while I could never forgive Janet and Mark for what they did, I could have compassion for the boy who was raised in that toxic environment. Danny and I agreed to stay in touch. He was building a new life based on honesty and accountability, just like I was. 2 years later, I received my master's degree and took a job with Child Protective Services. My first day on the job, I thought about 16-year-old me hiding in the stairwell, listening to adults say they wished they'd never adopted me. If I could go back and talk to that girl, I'd tell her, they were wrong about you, and you're going to prove it. As a CPS worker, I specialized in financial abuse cases involving foster children. My personal experience gave me insights that my colleagues found invaluable. I could spot the warning signs because I'd lived them. I knew what questions to ask because I'd wish someone had asked them of me. In my first year, I helped remove 12 children from financially abusive situations and recovered over $200,000 in stolen support funds. Each case felt personal but also healing. I was protecting kids the way I'd wish someone had protected me. One case involved a 15-year-old girl named Sophie, whose foster parents were using her disability payments to fund gambling trips. When I interviewed her, she reminded me so much of myself, smart, observant, but convinced she was powerless. Sophie, I told her, you have more power than you realize. You just need someone to teach you how to use it. I helped her document the financial abuse, connected her with a good attorney, and found her a placement with a family who truly cared about her welfare. 6 months later, Sophie's foster parents were facing criminal charges, and she was thriving in her new home. You saved my life, she told me. No, I corrected her. You saved your own life. I just showed you how. 10 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address showed it was from Janet, who had been released from prison years earlier. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, written in her familiar handwriting. She talked about the therapy she'd undergone in prison, the guilt she'd carried, and the realization of how badly she'd damaged me. "I know you have no reason to forgive me," she wrote. "But I need you to know that you were never worthless. You were never a burden. I was the problem, not you." She went on to say that seeing my success and advocacy work had made her proud, despite having no right to feel that way. "You became everything you were meant to be, despite what I put you through. That strength was always in you." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond, and maybe I never would be. But I appreciated that she'd finally acknowledged the truth. A year later, I received another letter, this time from Mark. His was shorter and less introspective, but he asked for forgiveness and admitted that I'd been right to expose them. I put his letter in the same drawer. Some wounds heal through forgiveness, others through distance. I was still figuring out which category this fell into. Today, I'm 31 years old and the director of a nonprofit organization that advocates for foster children's rights. I've written a book about my experience that became a bestseller and helped change legislation in 12 states. The Johnsons are grandparents now to my 2 children, who call them Nana and Papa. My kids will never know what it feels like to be unwanted or exploited. They're growing up in a home filled with love, honesty, and security. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard Janet and Mark that night 15 years ago. Would I have continued accepting their treatment? Would I have aged out of foster care without ever knowing my rights? Would other children still be suffering in similar situations? But then I remember that everything happens for a reason. I was meant to hear those cruel words. I was meant to feel that anger. I was meant to channel it into action that would change my life and the lives of countless other children. Last week, I received an award from the National Foster Care Association for my advocacy work. As I stood at the podium accepting it, I thought about teenage me, documenting abuse in a basement bedroom and dreaming of justice. To all the foster children listening, I said, remember that your voice matters. Your truth matters. And anyone who says otherwise is wrong. Janet and Mark wished they'd never adopted me. But I'm grateful they did, because it set me on a path to help children who needed someone to fight for them. They thought they were getting rid of a problem. Instead, they created an advocate who would spend her life making sure no child ever feels as powerless as I once did.